Hey everybody, and welcome to this deep dive, into crucial conversations. Those conversations that you kind of get a little heart fluttered.
Yeah.
I'm talking about where opinions vary, the stakes are high, and emotions can run pretty strong. So we're going to be drawing some insights today from the book Crucial Conversations: Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High, and really going to try to unpack what makes these conversations so tricky. More importantly, how we can all navigate them more effectively. Think about it, right? These conversations are not just like big formal negotiations. They really pop up everywhere in our lives, right? That talk with your partner, about finances or who's doing the dishes, or, that feedback session with a coworker, or maybe you're addressing an issue with a neighbor or a friend. These are all crucial conversations. And this book really makes a compelling case for the idea that these conversations have a much bigger impact than we often realize. They can impact our relationships, our health, our team's performance, even how organizations succeed or fail. And yeah, it turns out that, those really heated arguments, they do a lot more than just leave us feeling stressed and drained. The book actually dives into some pretty interesting research that shows a link between, you know, poorly handled crucial conversations and a weakened immune system. And there's even a study in there that connected, these conversations to higher mortality rates in cancer patients, which is really intense when you think about it. It really highlights how deeply these interactions affect us.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, though, right? When you think about it, unresolved conflict and bottled up emotions, they take a toll on us. I mean, it's mental and it's physical. And beyond just the health impacts, though, avoiding crucial conversations can really breed resentment, right? It creates distance and sometimes even escalates to more serious conflicts in our relationships. It's like that old saying, right? A stitch in time saves nine. Addressing issues early on and doing it in a healthy way can actually prevent small rifts from turning into major cracks in a relationship. And this plays out in the workplace big time, too.
I mean, crucial conversations, they can seriously make or break projects, teams, even entire companies. The book really highlights how this free flow of meaning in these conversations, it leads to better decision making and a much stronger commitment to action. When people feel safe to speak their minds, to express concerns, share ideas openly, that's when real synergy happens and everyone benefits. So we know these conversations are important, right? But here's the catch. We as humans are kind of wired wrong to handle them well. I mean, think about it. Our brains are designed for that fight or flight response, which, isn't exactly a recipe for calm, collected communication when things start to get heated. So when things get tense, our primal instincts kind of kick in, right? The adrenaline starts pumping, and we either clam up completely or we lash out. We very rarely actually handle the situation with the grace and intelligence that, we wish we could.
Mhm.
It's like our bodies are stuck in saber-toothed tiger mode, yelling run, while our rational minds are trying to say, hey, let's, have a productive conversation about this project deadline. And it's like, to make things even more challenging, crucial conversations often arise so unexpectedly. They catch us off guard completely, and we're left scrambling for the right words, you know, trying to navigate what feels like a minefield of emotions, and we don't even have a map. And to top it all off, how many of us have actually had really great role models for these kinds of conversations? It's not something that's often modeled for us, right? We often haven't seen really healthy examples of how to disagree respectfully, how to manage these strong emotions and reach a resolution that really works for everyone. So we end up winging it and falling back on those ingrained fight or flight responses, which, let's be honest, usually doesn't end well. But here's the good news. The book doesn't just point out the problem. It actually offers some real practical strategies for mastering these conversations. It's all about understanding how our brains work under pressure and then developing the skills to navigate those tricky situations. And that's what we're going to dive into next. Get ready to unlock some seriously useful tools and techniques to transform those potentially explosive conversations into opportunities for growth, for connection, and for achieving what we really want. All right, so let's start unpacking some of those practical strategies, for having healthier, more productive, crucial conversations. And the book really emphasizes this idea of starting with heart, which really resonated with me. It's all about getting clear on what we really want, like truly want, before we even go into a tough conversation. And it's not just what we want for ourselves, but also what we want for the other person and, for their relationship as a whole. I mean, when we're all caught up in the heat of the moment, it's so easy to get fixated on winning, like
Right.
winning the argument or proving our point or whatever it is. But if we can like pause even for a second and ask ourselves, what's my ultimate goal here? What do I really care about? Um, it can like totally shift our perspective and help us approach the conversation, you know, with a more open mindset, a more collaborative mindset. And the book has this great story about a woman named Greta, and it really illustrates this point. So Greta, she's leading this company-wide effort to reduce costs, and it's requiring, everyone to make some sacrifices. And then during a Q&A session, one of the managers calls her out, publicly questioning her decision to build a second office for herself. Like, talk about a cringeworthy moment, right? You can just feel the tension in the room. So how does Greta handle this, potentially disastrous situation? I mean, she could have easily gotten defensive, right? Tried to justify her decision or just, shut the conversation down altogether. But instead, she takes this deep breath and says, you know what? We need to talk about this. I'm glad you asked the question. And then she goes on to explain, the reasoning behind the office. She acknowledges that she wasn't initially aware of the full cost and then commits to revisiting the plan. And by focusing on her larger goal, which was to gain buy-in for these cost reduction efforts, Greta was able to take this potentially explosive confrontation and actually turn it into an opportunity to build trust and to demonstrate, her commitment to transparency. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most crucial step in a crucial conversation is actually taking a moment to check our own motives and making sure that they're aligned with what we truly value. So another key skill the book highlights is this idea of learn to look. It's all about being aware of those little warning signs that a conversation is kind of, starting to veer into crucial territory. And these signs, they can be pretty subtle, right? It can be shifts in body language, changes in tone of voice, or even just those internal reactions that we feel within ourselves. That feeling when your heart starts racing or your palms get all sweaty, or you suddenly have that urge to either fight back or just run for the hills. Those are all physical signs that our fight or flight response is kicking in and that it's time to start paying really close attention. And the book talks about these two common but unhealthy reactions we tend to have in these high-pressure situations: silence and violence. And these aren't just about, literally not speaking or getting physically aggressive. Silence, it actually encompasses a whole range of behaviors, like masking our true feelings, avoiding the topic altogether, or withdrawing from the conversation. It's basically anything we do to withhold meaning from the dialogue. And violence can be way more subtle than physical aggression, right? It can show up as any attempt to kind of force our meaning onto others, whether it's, through controlling the conversation, labeling people, or resorting to, attacks and insults. It's about trying to win at all costs, even if it means damaging the relationship. And the book actually gets really specific and gives names to these unhealthy forms of silence and violence, like masking, avoiding, controlling, labeling, and attacking. And I found these labels to be really helpful in understanding the different ways these kind of dysfunctional patterns can show up. Because learning to recognize those patterns both in ourselves and in others is absolutely crucial for staying in dialogue. When we can spot those red flags early on, we have a much better chance of course correcting and getting the conversation back on a productive track. It's like having a radar system that warns us when we're approaching stormy seas. The sooner we see those warning signs, the better equipped we are to navigate those choppy waters. Okay, so let's say we've recognized that a conversation is turning crucial. What's next? Well, the book really emphasizes the importance of making it safe. Because without that sense of safety, people are way more likely to either retreat into silence or resort to violence. It's like trying to have a productive conversation while walking through a minefield. No one's going to feel comfortable opening up or sharing their true thoughts and feelings if they're constantly worried about, getting blown up. So to create that sense of safety, the book highlights two essential conditions: mutual purpose and mutual respect. Mutual purpose, it means finding that common ground, agreeing on what we're trying to achieve together. It's about shifting away from that me versus you mentality and toward a we perspective, focusing on a shared goal that we're both invested in reaching. And mutual respect, as you might guess, is all about ensuring that everyone feels valued and heard even when we disagree. It's about communicating respect through our words, our tone, our body language, and being willing to genuinely listen to and acknowledge different perspectives. Now, it's inevitable that these conditions of safety are going to be damaged sometimes, right? Disagreements happen, emotions run high, and we might say or do things that unintentionally, cause harm. But the book gives us some really valuable tools for repairing that safety when it's been broken. And one really powerful tool is simply apologizing when we've made a mistake. Owning our errors and expressing sincere remorse can go a long way in rebuilding that trust. The book also introduces this technique called contrasting, which is all about clarifying our intentions and preventing those misunderstandings. And it involves explaining what we don't mean, followed by what we do mean, which helps to kind of eliminate those assumptions and create a shared understanding. And then there's this acronym CRIB. This one really stood out to me. CRIB, it stands for Commit to Mutual Purpose. Recognize the purpose behind the strategy, invent a mutual purpose, and brainstorm new strategies. It's this fantastic framework for kind of getting back to common ground when we find ourselves at odds. And the idea is to shift the focus away from like arguing about solutions and towards understanding each other's deeper needs and motivations. By committing to finding a solution that works for everyone, recognizing the purpose behind each other's positions, and then brainstorming those new options together, we can create a much more collaborative and respectful atmosphere. And TRIP is a great reminder that even when it feels like we're on opposite sides, there's often way more common ground than we realize. And by taking the time to uncover that shared purpose, we can bridge that gap and find a way forward together. So we've covered start with heart, learn to look, and make it safe, all of which are essential foundations for navigating these crucial conversations. But here's where things get even more interesting. The book really dives into this powerful influence of our internal stories and how they can often sabotage our conversations. And this is where the skill of master my stories comes into play. We all have these little movie projectors in our heads, right? Constantly playing these stories about why people do what they do. And these stories, whether they're accurate or not, have a profound impact on our emotions, and they drive our actions. And the book describes this process as the path to action. We see or hear something, we tell a story about it, we feel an emotion based on that story, and then we act accordingly. But here's the really empowering part. The book argues that we actually have way more control over our emotions than we think. And it's not about suppressing them or pretending they don't exist. It's about learning to challenge those stories that are creating those feelings in the first place. So instead of just letting our emotions hijack the conversation, we can take a step back, examine our stories with a critical eye, and ask ourselves, is this story really true? Do I have all the facts? Are there other possible explanations that might make more sense? Because very often the stories we tell ourselves are based on assumptions, incomplete information, or these sneaky, clever stories that we use to justify our unhealthy reactions. And the book breaks down these clever stories into 3 categories: victim stories, villain stories, and helpless stories. Victim stories are those narratives where we cast ourselves as these innocent sufferers, absolving ourselves of any responsibility in the situation. Villain stories, that's where we demonize the other person, making them out to be the bad guy, which conveniently justifies, our own anger or aggression. And then we have the helpless stories. And those are the ones where we convince ourselves that we have no power to change the situation, which allows us to kind of stay stuck in our unhealthy patterns. And the book gives this really compelling example of this with a woman named Maria. So Maria, she's feeling hurt and sidelined by her colleague Louis, because Louis seems to be taking all the credit for their joint project. And so Maria is telling herself this classic villain story about Louis, convinced that he's intentionally trying to undermine her. But then she starts to challenge that story. She asks herself, what are some other possible explanations for Louis' behavior? Okay, maybe he's just inexperienced and doesn't realize how his actions are affecting her. Or maybe he's feeling insecure and needs some reassurance. And by exploring these alternative explanations, Maria starts to see Louis in a more human light, which helps her approach the conversation with more empathy and understanding. It's such a powerful reminder that we often don't have the whole picture, and that challenging those stories that we tell ourselves can open up this whole world of new possibilities for connection and resolution. All right, so we've done some serious work, understanding these dynamics of crucial conversations and how to spot those warning signs and the importance of creating safety and mastering those internal stories we tell ourselves. But now it's time to talk about how we actually share our perspective in a way that's honest but also respectful. And the book offers this really helpful acronym for this. It's called STATE, and it stands for share your facts, tell your story, ask for others' paths, talk tentatively, and encourage testing. I love this because it just breaks it down into these manageable steps, right? It's not about just, dumping all of our emotions and opinions on other people, but about sharing our perspective in a way that really invites dialogue and understanding.
So remember, we start with the facts. This helps establish some common ground, keeps things a little less controversial. Then we share our story, our interpretation of those facts. But we do it tentatively, acknowledging that, hey, our perspective is just one possible way of seeing things. And that's where asking for others' paths comes in, right? It's about being genuinely curious about how the other person sees things, inviting them to share their facts and stories and feelings. And encouraging testing means being open to having our own views challenged, recognizing that we don't always have all the information or, the full picture. And the book has this really great example of state in action. It's about this woman named Carol, and she suspects that her husband, Bob, might be cheating on her. She finds a phone number on his credit card bill that she doesn't recognize, and her mind starts racing. Now, this is a situation that could very easily, spiral out of control. But Carol, she stays calm. and uses this state method. She approaches Bob and says something like, "Hey, I noticed this number on our bill and was wondering who it belongs to."
So she's sharing the fact, right, that triggered her concern. And then she tentatively, expresses her worry, saying something like, look, I'm not accusing you of anything, but I feel a lot better if we could clear this up. And what happens? It turns out there's this perfectly innocent explanation. It's a number for a new client that Bob's been working with. And Carol, by using state, was able to address this really sensitive issue without creating, unnecessary drama or conflict. It's a good reminder that we don't always have to choose between being honest and being respectful. We can actually do both. And by sharing our perspective in this clear, tentative, and inviting way, we really increase the chances of having a productive and meaningful conversation. Okay, so we've stated our path, now what? Well, it's just as important to really understand the other person's perspective. And that's where the skill of explore others' paths comes in. And guess what? The book offers another helpful acronym for this one. It's called AMPP. It stands for Ask, Mirror, Paraphrase, and Prime. And these AMPP skills, they're all about creating that safe space for the other person to share their perspective.
Showing them that we're genuinely interested in what they have to say and that we value their input. So how do we use these? First, we simply ask Banna, right? Expressing interest in the other person's viewpoint, inviting them to share their thoughts and feelings. That we read, mirror meaning we kind of reflect back those emotions that we see in here. We acknowledge those feelings without judgment. After that, we paraphrase, we put what we've heard into our own words. This ensures that, we're accurately understanding the other person's perspective. And then finally, we have prime. This is a bit more of an advanced technique, and we can use it when the other person is maybe hesitant to open up. It's about gently offering some possible explanations or interpretations to help them articulate what they might be thinking or feeling. Remember, crucial conversations are not about winning or proving our point right. They're about reaching that shared understanding and finding a way forward together. And that requires a willingness to really listen deeply and to truly understand the other person's perspective, even when it's different from our own. Okay, so we've explored each other's paths and we have a clear understanding of the situation. Now it's time to actually shift into action. And the book gives some really practical guidance on how to turn dialogue into results. So the first step is deciding how we're going to decide. It's about choosing the most appropriate decision-making process, for that particular situation. And the book outlines these four main approaches: command, consult, vote, and consensus. Command is where one person makes the call, which, can be useful when speed and efficiency are really important. Consult involves, the decision maker gathering input from others before making that final decision. Vote is, pretty self-explanatory. It's a more democratic approach. Everyone gets an equal say. And then we have consensus, which requires everyone to agree on the decision. And this one could be more time-consuming, but it often leads to higher buy-in and commitment from everyone involved. So choosing the right process is key, right, for ensuring that the decision is made fairly efficiently and in a way that respects everyone's input. And once the decision's been made, it's super important to document it and follow up. This means, clearly outlining who is responsible for what, setting those deadlines and creating the system for accountability. I mean, even the best decisions are useless if they're not implemented effectively, right? So by documenting the decision and having this clear plan for follow-up, we really increase the likelihood of turning those decisions into tangible results. So we've covered so much in this deep dive into crucial conversations, from understanding their impact to, all these specific strategies for handling them more effectively. But let's be real, putting these skills into practice in the heat of the moment, it can be tough. It's really easy to revert back to our old habits when the pressure's on, right? And the book acknowledges this challenge. It explains that, we often rely on these automatic responses in familiar situations. It's like we have these pre-programmed scripts running in our heads, and breaking free from those ingrained patterns can feel almost impossible sometimes. But here's the good news. The book doesn't leave us hanging. It offers some really valuable strategies for turning these ideas into habits, helping us respond, more skillfully and effectively, even when we're in the middle of a challenging conversation. So one of the powerful strategies is to practice and rehearse. The more we actively look for opportunities to use these skills, even in low-stakes situations, the more natural and automatic they become. It's like learning a new dance move. At first it feels all awkward and unfamiliar, but with consistent practice, it becomes smoother and more effortless. The book also encourages us to find what it calls a dialogue partner. So this is someone we trust to talk through these concepts with, someone who's willing to help us practice and give us some supportive feedback. Could be a friend, a colleague, a therapist, whoever. But having that support can really speed up our learning and boost our confidence. Another helpful tip is to use cues. And this could be anything from setting reminders on our phone to using visual prompts. even creating our own personal mantra, to repeat before a potentially difficult conversation. And these cues, they're just helpful reminders, right? They bring those crucial conversation principles to the front of our mind when we need them most.
And finally, the book reminds us to reward progress, not perfection. Changing those ingrained habits takes time and effort. And it's so important to celebrate those small wins along the way. Recognizing our progress, no matter how small, can boost our motivation and keep us moving forward on that path, to mastery. So that brings us to the end of our deep dive into crucial conversations. And I really hope you found this exploration as insightful and as empowering as I have. Remember, even the smallest actions can create this ripple effect, leading to more positive and productive conversations in every area of our lives. So before we wrap up, I want to leave you with this one final thought. Think about a conversation that you have coming up that feels a little crucial. Which of the skills that we talked about today feels the most relevant to you, or maybe the most challenging in that specific situation? What's one small step, just one that you could take today to start preparing for that conversation? Go out there, make those conversations count, and keep diving deep. I'll catch you on our next deep dive.